How you doing? My name is Lou Diaz. I'm a producer, mix engineer from Miami, Florida. I'm not a mastering engineer. Mixing and mastering are two different worlds. What I do in the master bus for the sake of mastering is I'm able to do a lot of things that my mastering engineer is going to do. And it allows me to sort of keep some of the things and just send it to it, with it on it, or say to him, listen, I'm doing it here. I'm going to send you a print of it this way so you know where we're going and where my client wants to be. The song Feel It Baby that we're working on right now is by an artist named Relz, and the song was produced by the Trackburners. The reason why I'm using the Abbey Road TG mastering on this session is just because I love it, man. This plugin came out and I wanted something that had sort of all the elements that this offers. Covers pretty much all the bases of what I normally would do with a mix. So I still follow with an L2 or even other plugins sometimes, but for the majority right now, I love staying within this plugin and really getting the rough idea of the way I want the master to come back. I'm going to show you really quick an A/B of the master plugin, disengage and engage so you can hear the difference in the mix.
Do you feel it, babe? Do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe. You won't feel it, babe. You forgot about it. You on this new wave. I swear you won't.
So as you can hear the difference there, if you have decent speakers, you'll hear how the width of the stereo field opened up, the low end got tighter and bigger. All these things happen with that one plugin on your master bus. So you can see how much of a difference one plugin could do, and also the importance of mastering. Question I get asked a lot is, what level or what peak level do I send my mix at for mastering? You want your level to be normal. You want your level to be at maybe 80%. You want to give the mastering engineer room to work, for them to add things. You don't want to smash the bus on the way out and then leave the mastering engineer no room to do anything to help your mix and literally killing all your dynamics. But with that said, while you're mixing a record, at least for me, I crank, man. I take this baby to 11. So what I do is I usually mix very loud, and then with a VCA or with a group trim, I'll trim everything back in relation to each other. See? The entire mix is actually grouped together. What I would say is, on Pro Tools, you'd want the meter to be 75% at least, but you don't want to get too high. For example, I'll show you now.
Babe, do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel.
Now, if you notice, that's all bass is driving that level up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these elements even further back by themselves and then put my group back on. In this particular case, I have a limiter on here, which is my mistake. I'm going to bypass it and show it to you again.
Babe, do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you.
Without anything on the master bus, that's pretty much a good level that you're comfortable with sending it to your mastering engineer. Once you're done mixing a record, now keep in mind, I mix a record where I have my master bus with an actual EQ compressor on it. I do that because I love to play back and forth from what I'm mixing and how it's being affected on my master bus. And the reason for that is because it gives me good ideas and good information to sort of relay to my mastering engineer. That's what's great about this plugin. I'm in love with it because there's so many real facets of it that I would actually send to mastering. I have some presets in the Abbey Road TG mastering chain. These are very useful, but you got to keep in mind that all these are starting points for you. For example, in Modern Warm, what I would think you'd be working on. But I encourage you to open them up, start with them, and twist those knobs, see what happens. This is just a starting point for you guys to get a good bass. I'm a big fan of listening to it as many different type of speakers or references as possible. I got several different monitors I listen to. And the biggest thing I would say is to take a break from it. So in other words, when I work on a record, I will mix all day and I will not print anything. The next day I come back and you'd be surprised how many changes you'll make just for the fact that your ear readjusted. Because you got to remember, throughout a mix session, you will start losing high end, you will start getting fatigued, and your perception will change. So a lot of people will leave, if you're not doing this for a long time, will leave that night with a print and the next morning wake up and realize that it's super bright. And that's because you had been losing some of that brightness as you're fatigued throughout the session. So different speakers, different days, very important. I think this plugin really lends itself really, really big to hip hop. Specifically is this tape equalizer. A lot of people talk to me about warmth, they want more warmth, and I want it to sound less digital. And this section right here, this tape EQ, really does bring that warmth and almost that low end exaggeration where it feels big and pillowy and subby. It's phenomenal. Now, we're talking on 50 IPS on the US side. This gets a little complicated because you're talking about the old tape saturations and the way tapes were sort of the way heads were EQ'd in these machines. And so what happens is when you play a song that was recorded, for example, on a UK standard reel to reel, and you play it back on a US reel to reel, you would get sort of an exaggeration on the high end and the low end, which is what's so genius about what they did here. They have both options. So if you go to the left, American playing over the UK, and then on the right, it's UK playing over the American side. And to the right, you're going to get exaggeration. To the left, you're going to get a little bit more dimming. But overall, that EQ is just magical. I love the way it sounds. It's definitely something that for hip hop is, I think, going to start catching on with a lot of people. So here's the EQ. Now, what I love about this, and I'll start first with explaining, let me go from the very top, why I chose mid-side as opposed to stereo. And for those of you who don't know, normally stereo is one channel versus the next channel, so you can pan something to the left, to the right, to two different channels. Mid-side is approaching in a different way. It's what's equal or what's the common between the two speakers is what we would call the mid. In other words, if the information is coming out of both speakers, that would be the mono signal. That is your mid. What's different in each speaker, that's your sides. And in mastering, it's a huge tool that they use to do spreading, to do sort of imaging, all sorts of stuff. So you can see that I have different parameters for the mid and different parameters for the sides. And that's because what I'm trying to do is work on the imaging of the record. I'm working on the sides. I might want to make the sizzle brighter and not affect the middle. And I want to be more aggressive with the middle.
Do you feel it, babe? You my rider. So come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe.
So you can hear I engaged it, and you can see the sub jumped out and the imaging spread out a lot. I'm going to go through each one of the bands that I affected on the mid and the sides here so you can get an idea. The great thing about this plugin is you have this solo button that solos the frequency you're affecting. Now on the mid, I obviously boosted the high end a little bit, and it's because I wanted that vocal and top of the snare to jump out a little bit more, and the hats and all that, and I'll play it for you real quick here. So I'm boosting about almost 4 dB, about maybe 3.5 dB there. And that's just to bring that high end up there. And the great thing about this is you can go fishing for what you want to boost. Say you want it to go lower. So you can see how powerful this tool is as far as like tailoring a mix after you're done with it. I also went down to about 250, 260, and I wanted to boost where the meat of the song is. So come ride this wave, I swear. That's just to give the middle, the kick, a little more push. I want to push that out of the record a little bit more. And you notice I have them all set to mid. All these are just bell curves, and a medium bell curve, a bigger bell curve with shelf. And finally, the sub. This is hip hop. You got to get this to be as big as possible. You my rider, so come ride this wave, I swear you. So you can see how much sub and how it brought that whole part of the mix up, and that's my intention. Now, some people would say, well, is that too boomy? Every record is different, and you got to do it with the intent that you have to mix with your ears and not your eyes. You got to listen. Moving on to the sides, here's where I added this frequency to sort of spread out the imaging a little bit more, and I'll show you what it is. So you can see that loop, that really gritty loop, is in that space, and the more I boost, so that, again, will open up the sides because it's only jumping this frequency on the sides, which is that stereo field. And I did it as well on this. So, and again, that pushes the stereo field out. I'm not a big fan of doing this sort of thing on sub-frequencies because you really want, the lower the frequencies are, the more mono you want them, so you don't have issues with the stereo field. I mean, I'm sure there's a use for that, but in this particular case, I was using it to just open the stereo field a little bit more. On this filter section, I used it in two ways. One was just to pull a little bit of the high-end brilliance off of the mix. Just I felt it was a little sheeny on this mix. So this is a good little quick tool to be able to pull back, say, maybe I went down to 15 to sort of curve it off. And then probably the most important one I did was I was boosting about 4.2. I'm big on listening to other mixes I've done or songs that maybe that I'm working on remind me of songs. And like I said, if you spend a lot of time in the studio, you'll tend to get You lose sort of your center because your ears get fatigued. Take a break, make a coffee, come back, and suddenly you'll hear it again. And especially when you hear it against another record you made that's mastered already, for example, it gives you a good sort of guide as to, oh wow, we're a little bright, or maybe we're a little dull. In my particular case, when I was listening to it, I wanted to boost a little bit more overall. And this presence section is awesome. I love it because you don't have to go back and tinker with all the mid-side stuff I did. I could just go here and really quickly 2 dB boost on 4.2, and it gave me that sort of bite I wanted that I was comparing to another record. Really quick. Let me be able so you guys can get an idea.
Do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe. You
For the sake of you hearing it, I'm going to exaggerate it so you see what I'm actually boosting.
feel it, babe. Do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave.
So that frequency just brought the vocal, the snare, all that out a little bit more. And that's just the last second touch you can do. So the limiter section on the Abbey Road, I'm not using it as a final limiter, as opposed to the L2, which is kind of like the entire song is being smashed. This is just to color the track more. A lot of people are going to say, oh, you don't really print with your limiter. True. But in this case, I'm using it as a compressor limiter to sort of tailor the middle and the sides. If you can notice, I'm using the modern setting to affect the mid only. So I'm compressing the middle at about 20, and that's just affecting the middle. And then the great thing is you have a mix. So I have about a 60 to 40 mix of the original with this, which is almost a parallel compression. Now, concerning the recovery time, it really depends on the record. The recovery time for me is all about the tempo of the record. Okay, you don't want to sort of like compress a snare and the recovery time is so slow that it doesn't allow the next transient to come. It just kind of messes with the flow of the record. So that's something you listen to. I usually use a pretty quick recovery time because I want it out of the way as quick as possible. I just want to control all the spikes in the mix. In this case, I'm using it lightly because you can see I'm mixing it, about a 60-40 mix. So it's not fully affecting the entire track, but what it is doing, I want the recovery to come in, or the compressor to come in and be out quickly. So that's why I have it set to, 2? And so I might even move that to 1. We're in the process of mixing this, but right now it's feeling good where I have it set.
Do you feel it, babe? Do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe. You won't feel it, babe. You forgot about him. You on this new wave. I swear you won't.
You'll notice too that at the very end, I added the spreader. Now, I love the way the spreader sounds. There's a lot of plugins that sort of have these features, but I just love the way they set this up. It just gives you another tool to sort of spread the stereo field out more. I didn't do much, 1.5 as you can see I have right there, but it's just to give it that last little bit of push out in the stereo field. That very well may be down the middle if I didn't need it because I was doing a lot of sort of that work with the mid side earlier. But at the end here, when I A-B'd it to other records, I still felt like I wanted to go a little wider, so I went ahead and popped that spreader in at 1.5 dB just to give it that little bit of more push out in the stereo field.
Do you feel it, babe? Do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe. You won't feel it, babe. You forgot about him. You on this new.
And that is going to the L2. So then by having the L2 afterwards, I can sort of like say, go back and say, oh, let me turn the L2 off and let me have less compression. Or maybe I want to go to a stereo compressor and not do a mid-side compression. All that kind of gets answered by listening to it through the L2 later. The L2 will actually give me a pretty good idea of what the loudness is going to feel like once I did all that on the mastering chain. I'll play it for you and I'll bring the threshold down so you can hear the difference.
Babe, do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe.
So I feel like the loudness war is kind of wrapping up, in my opinion, and part to do with the fact that a lot of these streaming sites are sort of standardizing levels. But loudness in hip hop, and the majority of the work I do, is important. It really is important because the energy of the record is very hard. I mean, there's a balance, and this is hard for some people to capture, but there's a fight between dynamics and loudness. Dynamics are so important. So is loudness. If you can sort of be in the middle there somewhere, and that's sort of the challenge all us mix engineers are challenged with, is to sort of keep some of the dynamics and have it loud enough for the client to really like be happy with it. A limiter on a final mix, the purpose to me is to sort of preview a little bit of what it's going to sound like as far as the loudness of the record once it's mastered. I never print with the limiter on there. And the reason why is because I want my master engineer to do that part of it. But I do have it for times when I need to sort of be in the room with a client that may want to hear it, sort of a preview. Some clients don't know the difference between what you're doing and what the mastering engineer is going to do. They're just going to know, wow, this doesn't sound loud in the way I want it. So this is a great tool, especially if you're working with the artist in the room, the L2, the trusty L2, to pop it on your master bus. And when the client comes in and listens to what you've done so far, pop it in, and I'll show you real quick the dramatic difference.
Babe, do you feel it, babe? You my rider, so come ride this wave. I swear you won't feel it, babe.
So that will give the client a good idea of what it's sounding like. Then what you do is you go back to bypass and go back to doing what you were doing. But like I said earlier, all these tools are there for you to listen. So just look, but make sure you always listen to what you're doing, and hopefully these tips helped you out with your projects.
Do you feel it, babe? Yeah. Imagine what I came to do, yeah. Going between your legs, you ride and I park it instead. Let me coach your position. You know what you're missing. Go ahead, make your decision. You deep in it. I ain't playing. You like what it is, and I'm saying.